Hello whisky fans, we've got an old familiar friend this time, Old Pulteney 12-year-old. So this is one that a few years ago, quite a lot of years ago, when I was starting my whisky journey, this was one that I would always have in the house, and for good reason. It was always really good quality, you know what you're getting, and it's just that little bit more interesting than all of the budget malts that you can buy. So Old Pulteney is made at the Pulteney distillery, which is in the port of Wick, which is about as far north as you can go in Scotland on the mainland UK without having to take a boat trip. And they do make quite a big deal of this on all of their branding and packaging. They actually dub themselves the Maritime Malt. They make a big deal about how you can taste the sea in their whisky. So let's give it a go and see if it's true. So let's get right into the nosing and the tasting. From the colour and the clarity of this, I will say that this is almost certainly a chill filtered whisky. I don't believe they say on the label either way. So on the nose, getting some really nice rounded orangey notes. Also some sweet vanilla with a little bit of a dry edge. And it has to be said that you actually can smell and taste quite a saltiness to this whisky. They're not entirely making it up when they say that it's matured by the sea, and you can taste that saltiness. Also getting some lovely rich caramel, confectionery, rather a juicy, sugary confectionery note. Some lovely honeyed malt. Not so much a cereal note, but a sugary, honeyed, barley sweetness. I think there is also a little bit of a spirity, little youthful note at the end. Again, quite a big hit of saltiness. It's a sweet whisky. There's lots of sweetness from the bourbon casks, sweet vanilla, honey, a little bit of oranginess. I will say that on the palate it is a little bit weak, bottled at 40%. If you're a beginner, it might not be an issue, but if you are used to your whiskies being full flavoured at 43 or 46%, this is going to come over a little bit watery. And I will say that whiskies bottled at 40%, they tend to suffer more on the palate than the nose. They just lack that certain power on the palate, and it really reduces the length of the finish as well, which is what we're getting here. Saying that, it's a very nice, enjoyable whisky. Lots of oranges, sweetness, honey, a little bit of maltiness, and it's all offset really nicely by that nice, dry, salty note. So the finish, fruity, a little bit dry, medium, short length. So as for a mark for this whisky, I think it's actually gone a little bit downhill in recent years. I would say that since the rebrand, and at least where I'm from, Old Pulteney 12 never used to come in a box, but they've given it this rather fancy box now with this really interesting lid, which doesn't have any clasps, but actually stays on really well. But since they've done this rebrand, I think that the Old Pulteney 12 does come over a little bit more dull, a little bit more lifeless. And it seems a little bit more over-blended. And I don't mean over-blended in terms of blended Scotch. I mean, when you blend a lot of different casks together for a mass-produced whisky, you can get to a point where they all start to cancel each other out, and you end up with something that is overly rounded, sometimes in a little bit of a negative sense, in that it drowns out a lot of the flavours and removes quite a bit of the character from the whisky. I will also say that the wonderful Old Pulteney 17-year-old that's been replaced with a 15-year-old is nowhere near as good. and the new 18-year-old that replaces the 21-year-old is not as good as the previous bottling either, which is a shame. But I think the most obvious comment I have about this whisky is the ABV. Bottling this one at 40% is such a shame, because I think it would be such a wonderful low mid-range whisky if you just bottled it at 43 or 46, probably even better, because you can tell that there's so much character there, but it's just not had the chance to shine as it could. But saying that, if you're starting out on your whisky journey and you've never had this one, you must buy a bottle of this. At least where I am, you can get this really cheap in the supermarkets. I think I paid less than £25 for this one, so it's really good value. And it does have that much more character than the other cheaper, like the medium to high end blends and some of the other single malts. This is quite a big step up. And if you are starting out, there are definitely some interesting flavours in there for you to pick out. It's well worth the money, and it's a nice experience. Or for the more experienced whisky drinker, if you're just looking for something a bit different and you haven't had yourself a bottle of old Pulteney 12 in a few years, highly recommend it for you as well, especially if you can find it on heavy discount. Cheers.